Hi class, I'm Haley. So I'm going to jump right in. For this study, I'd like to research the impact of after-school programs it has on juvenile crime rates and academic success. It isn't just about keeping our youth away from a life of crime, it's about giving them something to really strive for. This being said, academic success and crime deterrence should be looked at hand in hand. Over the last 2 decades, juvenile violent crime rates have grown almost twice as quickly as adult crime rates. During the same time, the punitive nature of the juvenile justice system has declined substantially. According to the U.S. Census Bureau in 2010, there were 225 arrests for violent crime index offenses for every 100,000 youth between 10 and 17 years of age. Violent crime committed by juvenile offenders peaks during the after-school hours. Nearly 1/3 of all violent crime committed by juvenile offenders occurs between 3 and 7 p.m., so that's right when they're leaving school. In comparison, nearly the same proportion of violent crime committed by adults occurs between the hours of 8 p.m. and 12 a.m., so you can really see the correlation for juvenile offenses in their time frame. The U.S. Census Bureau estimates that there are approximately 73.8 million youth under the age of 18 in the United States in 2012. In 2010, courts with juvenile jurisdiction dealt with more than 1.3 million delinquency cases. So what is happening? Why is this increase happening? And this is something I've also seen in my local community, which is why I'm so interested in this. So, within the last third of the 20th century, a quick get tough movement has taken place surrounding the debate of juvenile justice and policy. In the U.S. Supreme Court decisions, there's been a few through the late 60s and early 70s that changed the course of juvenile court and the proceedings. It moved the focus from juveniles and their crimes to focusing on the backgrounds and why they're actually committing these offenses rather than just the area they're in. It's why are they actually being criminals. Mid-1970s programs started emerging trying to curb juvenile violence, though these seemingly didn't work. During the 1980s, the United States saw another increase in urban youth violence. This put a pressure on the justice system to find a capable deterrent in approaching delinquency prevention and control. Illinois and Colorado were some of the first states to do this. They developed a children's court, and this kind of was an innovative and new way to control juvenile crime. The rates kept rising still. The society needed more, and there was skepticism about the ability of just regular justice to really look at juvenile court and apply the unique needs of juvenile and youth issues. With the popularity of Becker's labeling theory, people started wondering if our current juvenile justice system was doing any good. The unease within society and the justice system led to the enactment of the Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Act, and that came out in 1974. It's known as JJDPA. They had the authority to conduct research, provide training, make grants. They wanted to give state mandates, all these things for just that's centered on juvenile crime and academic success, which was kind of an afterthought. Over the few decades, this group became the research center for advancing the science of delinquency prevention, advancing their intake from 5 million to over 600 million within that time, their resources. Though, was this still working? This money finance programs called Scared Straight, where high-risk youth were brought into prisons, and other get tough kind of programs, but that still, research showed those things weren't really working, and they needed to find a better job to actually deter the crime rather than scare them straight. So the focus started changing. Community involvement started becoming more of a focal point on the juvenile justice spectrum, thus the birth of after-school programs. This after-school programs, the first ones were not very elevated, or they weren't academically, there was not a lot going on to make sure they had this standard of teachers' involvement, community involvement. It was just kind of putting them somewhere after school. So were they really supervised? It was kind of baby steps at this point. So each year, hundreds of millions of dollars are spent on funding after-school programs in the United States. In 2003, Congress gave approximately $1 billion to the use of after-school funding, and after-school programs have shown many positive effects on juveniles. And given the annual cost of juvenile crime is estimated at $56.7 billion, how society perceives that effectiveness is also really important rather than even just how they are using that money. So it needs to I am interested in how that works community by community, especially in a smaller community that maybe doesn't see all that money or doesn't utilize what they have and also doesn't know if it is working. So what I would like to do is after school programs, I want to look at community leaders, police officers, other professionals in that area that have vested interest in youth development, their delinquency, overall juvenile success, and their affiliation with after school programs. I will be interviewing and surveying professionals within a small community, probably International Falls, Minnesota, that's where I'm from, to gauge their reactions and assumptions surrounding juvenile crime and the effectiveness of after-school programs at deterring crime. Within this small area and the condensed information on local crime rates and vested interest in the community, I really think I'll be able to get a grasp on how effective after-school programs and development of youth and deterring crime are in this area. Because this is a small community and in northern Minnesota, I would caution against using this information as a general idea. For overall, it might just be accurate for some of the few communities that are up there or other, small cities. I'm simply trying to keep this knowledge there. I have a few friends and family members that work in this exact area up there, so maybe just being able to bring this resource straight to them would be beneficial. So some of the definitions that I had found on there were just what is an actual juvenile is a person that's not old enough to be considered an adult at a criminal act. Every state has something a little different. Normally it's right around 18 is what it is, and that's the standard, but there are some states such as California and North Carolina and New York where it's actually the age 16 that you're considered an adult if you're over 16. So juvenile delinquency is just a violation of law committed by a juvenile. After school programs are very open. It really depends on if you want to look at just after school programs that the community is created, that the school has created, but it's basically just a resource for students after school for them to the time between parents getting home from work, or if they don't have other sports or academic, it's what they do immediately afterwards. And deterrence is also the act of making someone decide not to do something or prevent a particular act. So youth deserve a chance some of them aren't lucky enough to get the tools they need just in order, or they just need more guidance. Many of us were, we played softball or baseball or basketball. We had stuff we were doing after school, but a lot of kids don't have that. So what is it they do with that time? This is a general statements for after school programs. There's so much government funding and there's so many programs that are out there that it's important to know if these resources are being used in an effective manner, especially in a littler community that has these resources that might not be utilizing them the right way or not knowing if they're working or not. So I did an extensive literature review, and there are so many studies on this, but little to none of them are done in a smaller community setting or urban setting at all. I would say, maybe I found one that was was sort of general for it, but it still was not applicable for where I'm from. So the government funding is a big thing that I want to dig into and see and interview how even if they know how it's being spent. So I don't know how long I'm making this right now. I feel like I'm starting to ramble, but there's extensive research. One of the main ones was done in Maryland, and it shows that the biggest correlations that make an after-school program successful are quality and safety. And that's pretty obvious what that means. Then community and parent involvement, and this isn't just community in general. This is coaching staff, this is teachers, this is other community leaders, and definitely parental involvement even if it was just helping them develop the kind of programs they had, different interests for the kids. It didn't have to be necessarily the parents there, just them knowing what was going on was a huge sign that these after school programs was being successful. And the third was, now I'm going to skip over it. I'm sorry, I lost my spot. Was the sense of actual academic achievement. So if these after-school programs weren't just there for them to kind of sit and waste time, it was actually helping them develop even a skill, not necessarily a skill that was in school, but say it's like a skate park or it's a cribbage thing. I don't know if that kids even do that anymore. But anything that's actually helping a social skill or a school skill or just an improvement to their personality and daily life at all showed that these students were more likely to come back, and it actually had a greater impact in their everyday life and their delinquency rates and all those things. So those three pieces were the most important that I found from all of it. The biggest one was the quality and safety. That's pretty obvious. If a student, especially with the resources I was able to find, it was mostly, larger cities, so safety was a huge factor. I don't know if that will be such a big factor where I'm doing this study, but quality definitely will be. So the after-school programs have been operating forever. I mean, a long time in many cities, in many different levels. There has been little research on public perception on how these are actually working within a community. There's a lot of ways you can look and see, like, prior to this, these are the crime rates. After this, these are the crime rates. Prior to this is the academic success, and after. But that's the most important. But are parents going to have their kids in these if they don't know how it's working? So public perception is another thing I'm really interested in seeing, how these actual outcomes work, if maybe they would help more, if they'd volunteer more, if there'd be more students, if they knew how these were actually working within the community. So that's pretty much what I've got. I don't know if I covered everything. It's what I really basically want to do is go into these small areas, and I'll probably just do International Falls if I can get my resources really together. I'd love to do another small town up there and just kind of compare and contrast. Vedette is another one. They're very similar in size, and I have friends and family in both areas, so I would easily be able to very easily get the resources, just depending on how time consuming this is. I would love to see what they actually have and get a list of these after-school programs, the kinds and the amount of students that go to each, the academic success. It doesn't even necessarily, I want the actual information of the delinquency and the academics, but I want the perception that the students have and the community and the parents have on how this is working for these students, and if this is money that's being well spent, or which program is working and some that are not. Anything that I can get together to help to really shed light on this. That's what I would like to do. All right, the end. Go Vikes. Woo!